Welcome back to Untold Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Westbrook, Connecticut. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and I'm about to tell you what happened when my brother decided to humiliate me one final time, not knowing that the stranger beside him held the truth that would change everything. Some families have a golden child. Some families have a scapegoat. I was lucky enough to be both the scapegoat and the invisible one at the same time. My older brother Derek got the attention, the praise, the celebration. I got the leftovers. The quiet acknowledgement that I existed somewhere in the background, like furniture that had always been there but no one really noticed anymore. Growing up, Derek was everything our mother Linda ever wanted in a son. Athletic, loud, charming, confident. He knew how to work a room. He knew how to make people laugh. And most importantly, he knew how to make our mother beam with pride at every single thing he did. When Derek got B's in school, Mom threw a celebration. When I brought home straight A's, she'd nod and say, "That's nice, Claire. Did you set the table yet?" I learned early that love in our family wasn't distributed equally. It was rationed out based on who shined the brightest, and Derek always made sure to stand in the spotlight. When he started his logistics company 5 years ago, you'd have thought he invented the concept of business itself. Every family gathering became a shrine to Derek's success. Mom would introduce him to relatives, neighbors, anyone who would listen. "This is my son, the entrepreneur. He's doing such big things." Meanwhile, I sat in corners, smiled when appropriate, and helped clean up afterward. What no one knew, what no one ever bothered to ask about, was what I was doing with my own life. I'd been working in finance since I was 23. I started as an analyst at a small firm, worked my way up through 80-hour weeks and sleepless nights, and by 30, I'd become a director at Apex Capital, one of the most influential private equity firms on the East Coast. We managed billions in assets. We owned controlling stakes in dozens of companies. We could make or break businesses with a single decision. But I never announced any of this, not because I was hiding it. I just never saw the point in fighting for attention that was never offered to me in the first place. So while Derek collected applause at every family event, I quietly built something real. That brings me to Derek's 38th birthday party, the night everything finally broke open. Mom had organized it at Derek's new house, a sprawling colonial he'd bought after his company's recent expansion. The place was packed with family members, neighbors, and business contacts Derek had invited to show off his success. Caterers moved through the crowd, music played softly in the background, and Derek stood at the center of it all, basking in the glow of everyone's admiration. I was standing near the back of the living room, talking to our cousin Rachel, when I heard Derek's voice rise above the noise. "Hey everyone, come here, I want you all to meet someone." I looked up and realized, with a sinking feeling, that he was walking toward me. He had that grin on his face, the one he always wore right before he said something designed to make everyone laugh at my expense. He threw his arm around my shoulder, turning me toward the crowd like I was some kind of exhibit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek announced, his voice dripping with mock affection, "this is my little sister, Claire, also known as the loser of our family." The room erupted in awkward laughter. Some people chuckled nervously. A few of Derek's business friends laughed outright. And my mother, who was standing right there in the front of the crowd, smiled. She actually smiled and shook her head like Derek was just being Derek. Boys will be boys. He doesn't mean anything by it. Before I tell you exactly what happened next, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I'm really curious to see how far this story will travel. I stood there frozen, Derek's arm heavy on my shoulder, the laughter still echoing. My throat tightened, my face burned. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never come back. But then a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, Claire?" I turned toward the sound. A man in a charcoal suit had stepped forward from the group of Derek's business contacts. His name was Victor Hale, and I knew him immediately. He was the CEO of a mid-size manufacturing company, one of the many companies that Apex Capital had acquired over the past 2 years. "Claire Bennett?" Victor repeated, his expression shifting from recognition to disbelief. "Wait, You're a director at Apex Capital, aren't you? The room went quiet. I could feel Derek's arm stiffen on my shoulder. Victor continued, his voice steady. Your firm owns the controlling stake in several companies I work with. I've been in meetings where your name has come up. You're the one who approved the expansion funding for... He stopped, his eyes moving from me to Derek. Then his face went pale. Hold on, he said slowly. Apex Capital. They own 51% of your company, don't they, Derek? Your firm secured expansion funding through them just last quarter. I felt Derek's arm drop from my shoulder like I'd suddenly become radioactive. The silence in that room was deafening. Every pair of eyes was on me now. My mother's smile had vanished. Derek's face had gone from smug to ashen in less than 3 seconds, and for the first time in 32 years, I finally had my family's full attention. I had no idea that the decision I made in the next 60 seconds would finally break the chains I'd worn my entire life and change everything. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Derek recovered first, forcing a laugh that came out strangled and hollow. Claire? A director? Come on, Victor. You must be confusing her with someone else. My sister works in... She's in finance somewhere, I think. Nothing major. Nothing major, I repeated quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Victor looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing he'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a business connection. I'm certain. I've seen her name on board reports. Ms. Bennett is part of the executive oversight team that... It's fine, Victor, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You're not wrong. Every head in the room turned back to me. I could feel their stares like physical weight. The relatives who'd ignored me for years, the business contacts who'd been laughing at Derek's joke moments ago, and my mother, whose expression had shifted from confusion to something I couldn't quite read. You work at Apex Capital? Mom asked, her voice small. I've worked there for nearly a decade, Mom, I said. I've been a director for 2 years. We manage over $3 billion in assets, and yes, I looked at Derek, whose face had gone from pale to slightly green. We own the controlling stake in Bennett Logistics, 51% to be exact. I've reviewed the quarterly reports personally. Derek's jaw worked silently, his mind clearly racing to recalculate every interaction we'd ever had, every joke at my expense, every dismissive comment, every time he'd paraded his success while I sat quietly in the corner. You never said anything, he managed finally. You never asked. The simplicity of those 3 words landed harder than any accusation I could have made. Because it was true. In 32 years of family dinners, holidays, birthday parties, and casual gatherings, not once had anyone in my family asked me about my career, my accomplishments, my life. They had simply assumed I was exactly what they expected me to be. The quiet one, the invisible one, the loser. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. A message from my assistant, Rachel. Board call ready when you are. Restructuring proposal on standby. This was the moment. The choice I'd been avoiding for months was staring me in the face, wrapped in the humiliation of Derek's joke and the bitter taste of my mother's smile. I could let it go, swallow my pride one more time, smile politely, excuse myself, and continue being the person my family expected me to be. After all, wasn't that easier? Wasn't that what I'd always done? But then I looked at Derek, at the fear flickering behind his eyes, at the way he was already scrambling to minimize, to dismiss, to turn this into another joke, and something inside me shifted. I thought about all the times I'd shrunk myself to fit into the small box my family had built for me, the birthdays where my achievements went unmentioned, the holidays where I cleaned up while Derek held court, the casual cruelty disguised as humor, repeated so often I'd almost started to believe it myself. And I realized I was done shrinking. I stepped away from the crowd and answered the call. Rachel, yes, I'm authorizing the restructuring proposal. Effective Monday, full leadership review of Bennett Logistics, vendor consolidation, performance-based metrics for all executive positions. Submit the paperwork tonight. I could hear my own voice as if from a distance, calm, professional, detached. This wasn't emotional revenge. This wasn't pettiness or spite. This was a correction. Derek's company had been underperforming for quarters. The board had already been discussing leadership changes. I'd been protecting him, delaying the inevitable, because he was my brother. But Derek had just made it very clear what he thought I was worth. I ended the call and turned back to face the room. "What did you just do?" Derek's voice cracked. "My job," I said simply. "Apex Capital owns the majority stake in your company, Derek. That comes with oversight responsibilities. We've been lenient because of personal connections, but the performance metrics don't lie. Effective Monday, your leadership position will be reviewed along with all operational protocols. I'd suggest preparing your documentation." If you're watching this right now and you've ever had someone in your family who made you feel small, made you feel worthless, made you feel like you didn't matter, have you ever imagined what it would feel like to finally stand in your truth and watch their world shift around you? Derek lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Claire, wait. Let's talk about this. You can't just, we're family. You can't do this to family." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Family," I repeated. "You called me the loser of our family 5 minutes ago." Mom smiled. Everyone laughed. "And now you want to invoke family?" I gently removed his hand from my arm. "Family isn't a shield you get to use only when you need protection from consequences, Derek. It's not a word you throw around after 32 years of treating someone like they don't exist." I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning, voices rising, questions being asked, Derek's protests growing more desperate. My mother caught me at the door. "Claire, honey, wait. Let's talk about this." "He didn't mean it. You know how Derek is." "I do know how Derek is, Mom," I said, meeting her eyes. "The question is, do you know how I am? Do you know anything about me at all?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I walked out into the cool night air, my heart pounding, my hands shaking slightly despite my outward calm. The next morning, I woke up with an exhaustion I hadn't felt in years, but beneath it was something else, something lighter. For the first time, I had stopped making myself smaller to protect people who had never once made room for me. I was done carrying their expectations. It was time to carry myself. The weekend felt like holding my breath underwater. I spent Saturday and Sunday reviewing documentation, answering emails from the board, and preparing for the formal restructuring announcement. My assistant Rachel called twice to check on me, sensing something beyond the usual work stress. "You know you did the right thing," she said during our second call. "The board has been pushing for this change for months. You were the one who kept delaying." "I know." "So, why does it feel complicated?" I stared out my apartment window at the city lights below. Because he's still my brother. Because 32 years of hoping things would change doesn't just disappear overnight. Because part of me still wanted to believe that if I just succeeded enough, they'd finally see me. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "And now?" "Now I'm realizing that some people only see what they want to see. And I'm done performing for an audience that was never watching in the first place." Monday arrived with the precision of a closing door. The restructuring announcement went out at 9 a.m. By noon, the board had begun the formal leadership review of Bennett Logistics. By the end of the day, Derek had submitted his resignation, effective immediately. The board accepted without hesitation. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no desperate pleas, just paperwork, signatures, and the quiet acknowledgement that the company's performance metrics hadn't justified its current leadership for a long time. Derek's charm had been masking declining numbers for months. Without my protection shielding him from scrutiny, the truth became impossible to ignore. Weeks passed, then months. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a reclaiming. For years, I had downplayed my achievements, hidden my accomplishments, shrunk myself to avoid making waves in a family that never appreciated me anyway. Now I stopped apologizing for my success. I accepted a seat on the board of a nonprofit supporting young women in business. I mentored junior analysts at the firm. I started speaking at industry conferences about leadership, resilience, and the power of quiet competence. For the first time in my life, I let myself take up space. My friend Vanessa, who I'd met at a leadership retreat years ago, noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said over coffee one afternoon. More present, more you. I spent 32 years being whoever my family wanted me to be, I said. Or rather, whoever they assumed I was. I think I finally got tired of living in their imagination. Vanessa smiled. And how does it feel? Living in your own? Terrifying, I admitted. And free. If you're watching this right now and you've ever felt like you were living in someone else's story, playing a character that doesn't fit you anymore, what would it take for you to start writing your own? The information about Derek's situation came to me gradually, through cousins and distant relatives who had suddenly become very interested in maintaining contact. His resignation had been public enough to spark whispers. Former business partners had distanced themselves. The house he'd bought to showcase his success was now for sale. I learned that he'd attempted to start a new venture, but without the Apex Capital backing, and more importantly, without the reputation he'd built on the foundation I had unknowingly provided, investors were skeptical. The charisma that had always carried him could only stretch so far without substance behind it. Part of me felt a pang of something, not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. The hollow space where sympathy might have lived if he had ever shown me any. Then my cousin Rachel, who had witnessed the party confrontation, called me with an unexpected apology. I should have said something, she admitted. That night, and 100 nights before. I watched them treat you like you didn't matter, and I never spoke up. I told myself it was family dynamics, that it wasn't my place. But that was cowardice. Rachel, no, let me finish. I've been thinking about it a lot since that party. How we all just accepted the story we were told about you. Claire's the quiet one. Claire's the boring one. Claire's the one who doesn't do anything interesting, and none of us ever questioned it. None of us ever actually looked. Her words hit harder than I expected. Thank you for saying that. Derek's a mess, you know, she continued quietly. And your mom? She's been calling everyone, asking what happened, like she genuinely doesn't understand. I let out a breath. She doesn't. That's the whole point. Knowing that Derek's empire had crumbled, that the consequences of his actions had finally caught up with him, it should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like balance. Not revenge, but correction. The universe finally adjusting the scales that had been tilted for far too long. I wondered, if they had simply asked about my life all those years ago, would any of this have been necessary? 6 months passed before the next family gathering. It was a holiday dinner at my aunt's house, and I almost didn't go. But something pulled me back, not obligation, not guilt, but curiosity. I wanted to see if anything had truly changed, or if the old patterns would simply reassert themselves the moment I walked through the door. The house was quieter than usual, fewer people. The absence of Derek's usual entourage was notable. No business partners, no investors, no admirers gathering around him like planets orbiting a sun. He was there, standing near the kitchen with a drink in his hand, looking smaller somehow. Not broken, but diminished. The confidence that had always surrounded him like armor now seemed thin, brittle, and the way people looked at me had changed. Relatives who had once talked past me now made direct eye contact. Conversations paused when I entered a room, not in hostility, but in attention. The careful, measured respect that comes from people who have recalculated their assumptions and found themselves on uncertain ground. No one called me a loser. Not that night, and not any night after. My mother found me in the hallway, away from the main gathering. "Claire, can we talk?" I nodded, following her to a quiet corner of the house. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time. The confident woman who had always favored Derek, who had smiled at his cruelty like it was just harmless fun, she seemed uncertain now, lost. "Was it worth it?" she asked finally. "Everything that's happened to Derek, to our family, was it worth it?" I took a long moment before answering. "Mom, I didn't do anything to Derek that he hadn't already done to himself. The company was underperforming. The board was going to act eventually. The only thing that changed was that I stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices." "But he's your brother." "And I was his sister," I said quietly. "For 32 years. Did that ever stop him from humiliating me? Did it stop you from smiling when he did? Her mouth opened, then closed. I watched the understanding slowly dawn on her face, the recognition of a pattern she had never questioned, a dynamic she had helped create and maintain without ever examining. I didn't realize, she started. No, I agreed. You didn't. And the fact that you're surprised by my power, that you're surprised by my success, that's exactly the problem, Mom. You never looked. You never asked. You just assumed I was whatever story Derek told about me. The conversation ended there, suspended in the weight of truths too heavy for a single holiday dinner to resolve. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness, that would take time, if it came at all, but acknowledgement, the first crack in a wall that had stood for decades. Derek approached me later as I was getting ready to leave. Claire, wait. His voice was subdued, stripped of the bravado I'd known my whole life. I've been thinking about what you said, about family not being a shield. He stopped, struggling for words. I guess I never thought about how things looked from your side. No, I said evenly. You didn't. I'm asking now. I studied his face, the brother I'd loved despite everything, the brother who had never seen me, the brother who was finally perhaps beginning to look. I hope you figure things out, Derek, I said honestly. I genuinely do. But I can't be part of your recovery. I spent too many years shrinking myself to make you comfortable, and I'm not doing that anymore. So that's it? We're just done? We're not done, but we're not what we were either. You have other resources, other support systems. Mom, our relatives, your friends. I didn't take everything from you. I just stopped letting you take everything from me. So after everything you've heard, if you were standing where I am now, with a family member asking you to return to the way things were, to rebuild a relationship built on your invisibility, would you go back and call it forgiveness? Or would you choose freedom and call it self-respect? I drove home that night through quiet streets, the holiday lights blinking in windows of houses where other families were gathered, telling their own stories of loyalty and betrayal, love and disappointment. I thought about the moral of my story, the lesson I'd carry forward into whatever came next. It wasn't about revenge, though the world might see it that way. It wasn't about proving them wrong, though I had. It was about something simpler and more profound, the radical act of existing as myself, fully and without apology, of refusing to shrink to fit a box that was never the right shape for me, of understanding that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just possession dressed in softer clothes. The people who truly care about you don't need you to be small so they can feel big. And family, real family, isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by the people who see you, who ask about your life, who celebrate your wins and hold you through your losses. It's defined by presence, not obligation, by choice, not accident. I'm still building that family. It's smaller than the one I was born into, but it's real, it's genuine, and it doesn't require me to be anything other than exactly who I am. My mother still calls sometimes. We're working on it, slowly, painfully, with more honesty than we've ever had. I don't know where it will end up. Some bridges can be rebuilt, some are better left as ruins to remind us why we crossed the river in the first place. Derek has found his footing again, in a smaller way. A consulting role, I heard, less glamorous, but perhaps more authentic. We're civil when we see each other. Maybe one day we'll be more. Maybe not. I've learned that hope doesn't require certainty. As for me, I'm no longer the loser of my family. I never was. I was just the only one who knew my own worth, and now finally, so do they. And that's Claire's story, a woman who spent 32 years being invisible in her own family until one public humiliation revealed the truth that no one ever bothered to discover. She wasn't the loser. She never was. She was just surrounded by people who never looked closely enough to see her. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt unseen, undervalued, or dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you most, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you would have done in Claire's shoes. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you never miss another story. We post new stories every single week, stories of betrayal, karma, and the quiet power of finally standing in your truth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change. Until next time. Remember, your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. I'll see you in the next one.